In 1971, a social psychologist named Philip Zimbardo built a simulated prison environment in the basement of Stanford University to observe an unsettling question about human nature. What happens when you place completely normal, healthy, and moral individuals into an inherently corrupt system? He selected 24 psychologically stable male students with no criminal record or behavior issues and randomly assigned them to play the roles of either prisoners or guards. The experiment was scheduled to last for 2 full weeks, but within just 6 days, the situation collapsed into absolute psychological horror. The students assigned as guards completely absorbed their roles, exhibiting severe levels of sadistic cruelty, psychological torture, and systematic humiliation against their peers. Meanwhile, the students playing the prisoners quickly disintegrated into states of total emotional trauma, passive resignation, and learned helplessness. The experiment had to be abruptly terminated to protect the physical and mental safety of the participants. This landmark study exposed a terrifying biological reality that became known as the Lucifer effect. It proved that human morality is not a permanent, unalterable trait etched into your soul. Instead, your moral alignment is highly fluid, dictated far more by your immediate environment and systemic roles than by your personal values. Your brain possesses an automated capability to execute actions you currently despise, waiting silently for the right structural pressure to flip the switch. The Lucifer effect describes the profound psychological transformation where good people cross the moral boundary line to commit acts of cruelty or malice. Philip Zimbardo's research revealed that the human mind relies heavily on a process called situationism, the absolute power of external circumstances to override individual personality traits. To the conscious ego, morality feels like an absolute solid foundation. You genuinely believe that your values, your upbringing, and your internal compass ensure you would never act maliciously under pressure. But your subconscious mind operates on a completely different law. The brain is evolutionarily hardwired to adapt to its immediate social hierarchy to ensure its physical survival. When you are placed inside a specific system, whether it is a corporate structure, a tight social group, or an institutional role, your mind immediately begins adjusting your moral threshold to match the group baseline. It quietly recalibrates what is acceptable, ensuring you fit into the pack. This process happens entirely beneath your conscious awareness, making it one of the most deceptive traps in human consciousness. Your mind does not notice itself changing, it simply alters your internal settings to align with the matrix around you, slowly eroding your personal ethics to maintain social survival. To understand why the mind surrenders its personal values so quickly, we must examine the neurobiology of empathy and the process of de-individuation. When neuroscientists use functional brain imaging to scan individuals who are placed in highly structured group environments or assigned positions of absolute authority, they observe a rapid drop in activity inside the medial prefrontal cortex, the exact region responsible for self-reflection and moral reasoning. Simultaneously, activity slows down in the mirror neuron network, which allows us to physically experience and mirror the emotional pain of other human beings. When you lose your sense of individual identity and blend into a group or a role, your brain stops processing the consequences of your actions on a personal level. The neural pathways that generate the feeling of guilt or internal conflict are effectively bypassed. Your biology enters a highly automated state where processing systemic orders or group dynamics takes absolute precedence over individual ethics. In a very literal sense, the brain pulls the plug on your personal conscience, allowing you to execute harmful choices without registering the emotional distress that would normally stop you. Your biology silences your internal voice, turning you into a functional cell of a larger unfeeling system. When this neurobiological silence takes hold, the subconscious mind deploys an aggressive psychological shield known as moral disengagement. This is an automated defensive maneuver designed to protect your ego from the agonizing weight of guilt. If your actions directly violate your moral standards, your brain experiences severe cognitive dissonance. To remove this internal pain, the mind immediately begins editing the narrative of your behavior. It uses highly sanitized language to reframe destructive choices as necessary, protective, or highly logical. For example, in corporate or institutional environments, individuals will describe harming others as simply optimizing efficiency, following protocol, or protecting the organization's bottom line. By changing the vocabulary, the brain successfully detaches the action from your personal identity. You get to participate in a cruel or destructive system during the day, while still going to sleep at night entirely convinced that you are a highly moral, upstanding individual. The ego demands protection, and it will happily manipulate your moral perception to ensure you never have to face the terrifying reality that your current choices are actively causing harm. The primary weapon of moral disengagement is a process known as diffusion of responsibility. This occurs when an individual participates in a harmful or unethical action, but avoids personal guilt by convincing themselves that the blame is shared equally among a group. When you are a lone actor, your brain shoulders 100% of the moral burden, which creates an immediate barrier against bad behavior. But the moment you enter a large organization, a corporate hierarchy, or a mass social movement, your subconscious performs a highly dangerous mathematical equation. It divides the personal guilt by the total number of people involved, reducing your individual responsibility to almost nothing. You tell yourself, I am just a small cog in a massive machine, or I am simply following orders from above, or if I don't do it, someone else will. Notice how the mind does not deny that the action is wrong. Instead, it completely detaches your personal agency from the outcome. This is the precise mechanism that allows highly educated ordinary citizens to participate in systemic corporate corruption or societal harm. Your brain uses the crowd as an emotional shield, allowing your personal morals to quietly erode under the comfort of collective anonymity. Alongside the diffusion of responsibility, the mind utilizes a secondary, highly passive filter known as dehumanization to clear out any remaining internal conflict. To prevent your mirror neurons from firing and generating empathy for someone you are harming or judging, your subconscious must strip away their human identity. The mind does this by applying broad, clinical, or highly derogatory labels to the opposing group. In social conflicts, corporate layoffs, or political divides, the brain stops viewing the other side as independent individuals with families, fears, and emotions. Instead, it categorizes them as statistics, structural deadweight, or a threat to the collective good. This selective attention filter ensures that your brain actively blocks out evidence of their shared humanity, while overemphasizing any data point that makes them appear dangerous or inferior. Dehumanization transforms your external world into a simplified game of chess, where treating people poorly no longer feels like a moral violation. It allows you to operate with absolute emotional coldness, completely convinced that your hostility is entirely justified, safely shielding your ego from the realization that you have become the exact monster you claim to oppose. These abstract biological filters manifest daily in devastating real-world traps, the most common of which is the cycle of gradual moral erosion. Nobody wakes up one morning and decides to completely abandon their values or destroy their integrity. Instead, the Lucifer effect operates through a series of micro-choices that appear completely insignificant on their own. It begins with a tiny compromise, a minor lie on a professional report, a small act of gossip at work, or choosing to look away when a colleague is treated unfairly. Because the infraction is small, your brain easily rationalizes it away to protect your self-esteem. But once that initial boundary line is crossed, your internal baseline for acceptable behavior changes. The next, slightly larger moral compromise no longer triggers a neural alarm, because your brain has already habituated to the previous level of deception. Over months or years, you slide down an incremental slope of ethical decay, entirely blind to how far you have fallen. You eventually look at your life and realize you are participating in patterns of behavior you would have found completely abhorrent years ago, entirely trapped in a web of your own slow, subconscious justifications. We see this exact same self-sabotage playing out in the destructive pattern of the echo chamber conformity loop. In our modern digital landscape, humans frequently anchor their entire sense of personal identity and moral correctness to online tribes or political movements. When you enter a highly ideological digital space, your predictive brain enters an aggressive state of conformity tracking. To secure your position in the group and avoid social exclusion, your subconscious forces you to alter your communication style. You begin adopting the group's specific language, participating in public shaming campaigns, and expressing intense hostility toward anyone who questions the collective dogma. The mind uses this performative outrage to secure its safety, but it carries a massive hidden cost. Over time, the constant repetition of tribal hatred rewires your empathy channels. You find yourself celebrating the misfortune of outsiders and justifying cruel actions solely because they benefit your tribe. You look at your online behavior and tell yourself you are fighting for truth and justice, but the reality is far more profound. Your mind has sacrificed its personal capacity for objective moral judgment simply to secure the cheap, temporary comfort of group validation. When this moral disengagement scales up from an individual level to a societal scale, it produces the terrifying phenomenon of systemic complacency. When an entire generation or workforce stops operating on independent ethical reasoning and surrenders entirely to institutional protocol, the collective prefrontal cortex of that society essentially collapses. Corruption, cruelty, and inequality cease to be shocking anomalies. They become standard operating procedures. People walk past systemic decay every single day, completely unmoved, because the narrative of their roles shields them from the reality of their environment. They adopt a shared defense mechanism that says, "That is just how the world works, or it is not my department to fix it." This passivity is the ultimate fuel for societal decline. A broken system does not require evil masterminds to survive. It only requires ordinary, moral citizens who are willing to quietly execute their daily roles without ever questioning the outcome. When an entire population simultaneously uses situationism to excuse its own complacency, integrity completely vanishes from the culture, and a society can slide into absolute decay, while its citizens remain entirely convinced that nothing is wrong. The true danger of the Lucifer effect is that it constructs a perfectly closed, self-fulfilling cognitive loop that entirely blinds you to your own behavior. The cycle begins when you enter a corrupt system or a high-pressure social role. This environment creates immediate subconscious pressure to conform, forcing your brain to reduce activity in its self-reflective networks. Because your internal boundaries are lowered, you execute a small, unethical choice or participate in a group judgment. To clear the immediate wave of guilt, your mind instantly deploys rationalization and diffusion of responsibility, rewriting the event to shield your self-esteem. The failure to stop the bad behavior is then used by your predictive engine as a new, acceptable baseline for the future. When the next opportunity for compromise arrives, your mind looks at its past data and says, "We did it before and we are still a good person, so it is safe to do it again." The loop closes perfectly. Every cycle strengthens the neural pathways of moral blindness, allowing you to walk through life completely convinced that you are a realistic victim of a difficult system, completely blind to the reality that you are actively building the machine of your own corruption. Breaking free from the matrix of systemic conformity requires a rare, dangerous psychological practice known as everyday heroism. Philip Zimbardo concluded that the only way to resist the absolute power of the situation is to cultivate a mindset of conscious independence. This process begins by explicitly separating your personal identity from the professional or social roles you occupy. When you sit at your desktop or enter your workplace, you must force yourself to monitor your choices not through the lens of protocol, but through the lens of objective human consequence. The moment you notice your mind manufacturing an excuse, the moment you catch yourself saying it's just business or everyone else is doing it, you must trigger an immediate internal alarm. This alarm is your cue to execute an act of psychological defiance. You must force yourself to speak the truth, set an independent boundary, or refuse an unethical order, even if it creates immediate social discomfort or professional risk. By intentionally choosing the pain of nonconformity over the comfort of compliance, you shatter the behavioral loop. You present your predictive brain with an undeniable data point that proves your values are stronger than your cage, instantly restoring your psychological autonomy. Guarding your own integrity is arguably the most difficult challenge your consciousness will ever face, because every evolutionary code inside your biology wants you to blend in, follow the herd, and protect your ego through denial. Your brain wants to keep you compliant, safely shielded from the vulnerability of standing alone against a broken system. But now that you know the anatomy of the trap, now that you understand how the Lucifer effect, moral disengagement, and diffusion of responsibility operate below your conscious awareness, the system has lost its hold over you. You can choose to step out of the crowd and view your actions with absolute, unyielding moral clarity. This navigation of your subconscious architecture is incredibly deep, and your mind uses dozens of other invisible neural mechanisms every day to dictate your choices and trap you on autopilot without your consent. If you are ready to dismantle the rest of these hidden mental loops, discover how your mind fakes reality, and unlock the true mechanics of your ego, click on the playlist appearing on your screen right now. We have built an entire archive of long-form psychological deep dives designed explicitly to help you look past the self-delusions of your subconscious. Click through, explore the library, and take absolute control of your psychology.